You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with economics correspondent at The Spectator, Kate Andrews, and The Guardian columnist, Zoe Williams. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Here we go is the front of the Metro as they look ahead to Team England's next World Cup challenge against reigning champions, France. The front of the Daily Mail pictures players Bukayo Saka, Phil Foden and Harry Kane as they celebrate England's win against Senegal. Energy firms target homes in fuel poverty, reads the front of the Eye, as it estimates more than 500,000 households are deeply in debt over their energy bills. The Financial Times reports that Ursula von der Leyen saying the EU needs to simplify and adapt its rules on state aid in response to America's green energy subsidy scheme. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Kate Andrews and Zoe Williams. Welcome to you both. Let's start off with the Mail. And the headline, front page there, moans threats over COVID firm. Now, this is off the back of Matt Hancock's book that's being serialised in the Mail. He's revealing various secrets. Kate.
So the latest secret, I suppose, to drop from Matt Hancock's Pandemic Diaries is his claim that Tory peer Michelle Mone, in his words, was extraordinarily aggressive about lobbying to try to get one of the contracts at the height of COVID to supply lateral flow tests. This isn't the first time we've heard this accusation against Baroness Mone. There were reports over the weekend from so-called Whitehall sources that she had been aggressive towards people like Michael Gove, who was in cabinet at the time, over PPE contracts as well. There have been questions in the past about her connections to certain companies and offshore bank accounts. So this is not the first time that she's been caught up in, say, a financial or lobbying controversy. But it seems from the Mail and its serialization of parts of this book that he is taking the side of Michael Gove and suggesting that, indeed, yes, this kind of lobbying was happening, which is going to be very uncomfortable for the Tory government, especially as there are growing questions around the House of Lords, who's being appointed to it, how those people get appointed, what the process is, and the integrity that Rishi Sunak has promised to bring to the job. Of course, he won't in any way be directly responsible for Baroness Mone's claimed lobbying. It should be noted that she has been insistent so far that she is innocent. But it's yet another scandal under a Tory government from a Tory peer that's going to make the government uneasy.
Yes, and we should say that Baroness Mone is under investigation by the House of Lords Commissioners for Standards. What's your take on this, Zoe? Does it matter that these details are coming from Matt Hancock?
There's a really important understory here, which is that Matt Hancock's trying to rehabilitate himself with this kind of warts and all telling of of his COVID response, as well as his appearance on I'm a Celebrity. The truth is, he was health secretary, right? He didn't have to respond to her frenzied emails. He didn't have to give her this contract worth millions of pounds. He didn't have to bow down to the way she was behaving. And clearly she's very emotionally dysregulated. No, never mind the kind of specific misdemeanors that she's under investigation for. She's been well known as a sort of histrionic, very dysregulated personality for a really long time. And that's come out in interviews time and time again. So I'm very resistant to a narrative in which she comes off as the bad guy and Matt Hancock comes off as this, bullied health secretary. He was a cabinet minister. He should have been resistant and trenchant in his stance that government contracts went to reputable businesses. And the fact that he's giving a warts and all memoir of it shouldn't really make any difference.
Do you agree with that, Kate? Go ahead, Kate.
Well, I would just jump in there and say, according to the Mail, he says that he did not reply to those aggressive text messages, and that they were getting more aggressive because he wasn't giving those contracts. And that's according to the Mail. That at one point he just says, "I'm not going to reply." So I'm not sure that we can lay the full blame at Matt Hancock's feet. But I completely agree with Zoe that what we are looking at when we look at these pandemic diaries, when we look at these excerpts, is a man who's desperately trying to clear his name and get back in the good graces of the public. And of course, he lost those good graces, well, for many reasons throughout the pandemic, in my opinion, but mainly because he was guilty of breaking his own guidelines in a very severe way after telling people for the better part of 2 years to socially distance and not see their loved ones. He, of course, was caught being very intimate with a loved one. So we do have to take all of this with a pinch of salt. We do have to look at it in the context of Matt Hancock trying to point the blame at others and insisting that the way that he handled the pandemic is not what he's asking for forgiveness for. We must interrogate that and question that. In this case, however, I'm not sure that we can accuse him of just dishing out these contracts to Baroness Mona. Actually sounds like he did push back.
Zoe, just very quickly before we move on, do you think that he has successfully rehabilitated himself with the British public?
Well, it's really strange, right? Because everywhere on social media and everywhere, if you asked people, there was no surge of popularity for him in I'm a Celebrity, and yet he finished in the top 3. So there were a lot of shy Matt Hancock fans who weren't saying they were fans, but they were seeing him as like a kind of, troubled bloke who did his best. I think that's pretty much the story of the kind of classic Conservative voter now, that they don't ever say they're going to vote Conservative, but then somehow they manage to. And I think there's a lesson in there for people kind of celebrating too soon that the Conservatives have finished as a government. There are a lot of people who are prepared to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Zoe, I'm going to stay with you because we've momentarily lost Kate, I'm afraid. So let's move on to The Guardian and this story that we read, that people in the UK are getting sicker and poorer with a gaping health and wealth divide between the regions that is getting worse. This is according to research from the IPPR think tank.
Yeah, so the IPPR, I mean, it's known as a think tank that's sort of centre-left, but I think it's also known as a very kind of neutral, sober organisation. And when they come out with figures like this, you need to take them seriously because they're certainly not doing it from a kind of partisan perspective. The amount of long-term sickness, which is, really keeping people out of the workplace, is astronomical. We've known that for quite a long time, 700,000 extra people out of the workforce because they're just not well enough. But what this report shows is how regionally determined that is. So you're seeing kind of people in the Northwest much more likely to be out of work for ill health than people in the Southeast and in London. Now, the thing is, you've got to bear in mind at this point just how unlivable benefits are after 12 years of austerity, and just how difficult it is to be on disability or sickness benefits, because the constraints are so tight, the demands are so stringent, that people are genuinely struggling to keep themselves alive on the social security support that they have. So it makes a mockery of the levelling up agenda. Not only did it not happen, not only was nothing constructive done, but in the absence of any kind of sincere and directed policy, regional divides have got much, much worse over the past 5 years, and worse generally over the past 12 years.
Yes, the divide does seem to be widening at a pace. Economic inactivity because of sickness is at its highest level, we read, Kate, since records began, with 2.5 million working-age adults inactive because of their poor health.
Yes, this number is terrifying, although I have to admit not completely surprising. The Spectator has calculated that roughly 5.2 million people of working age are out of work altogether at the moment and on some kind of out of work benefit. And I don't think we should be terribly surprised with the waiting list at over 7 million appointments on NHS England alone, and having the National Health Service essentially become the National COVID Service for well more than a year, closer to 2, that we now find out that it's roughly 2.5 million people who are inactive because of a long-term health condition. These are terrifying numbers, and the very hard reality is that the government expects these figures to go up higher higher before they go back down. The estimate at the moment is that by March 2024, that waiting list will be 9 million. This is no way for people to live, especially if they're in long-term pain. I think it is interesting, this report over the weekend, that they're going to recruit pharmacies to help better medicate people and make access to medicine, especially at that lower level, slightly easier. I think all of this adds up to a genuine rethink about how we provide healthcare in the UK, and the fact that lots of countries struggle with their health services during the pandemic, but they don't have waiting lists like this. And until we can get those 2.5 million people back into work, we should expect inflation figures to stay higher, because of course those labor shortages are contributing to that domestic service crunch and that inflation that we're experiencing.
Let's go inside the Metro now, page 2, on the nurses' strike. Zoe, take us into this story.
So it cannot be overstressed how incredible it is that the nurses are going on strike at all. It's a black swan event. It's never happened in the history of the nurses' union. It's very rarely even been kind of part of the discussion around what kind of industrial pressure they can put on the government. So it's really a signal that they're at their wits' end. And then Nadhim Zahawi comes out with this line that by asking for a pay rise and by threatening a strike, they're playing into the hands of Vladimir Putin. Now, never mind that it's completely irrelevant to Vladimir Putin whether or not British nurses are on strike and what their pay offer is. It's particularly piquant and insulting from Nadhim Zahawi, given that his own property portfolio is valued at between 100 and 300 million pounds, and we have this again and again and again with this really extraordinary government of unbelievably rich people. It's like, as a nation, we're just not used to.
Is his property portfolio relevant, though, Zoe?
It's extremely relevant when you've got somebody lecturing a huge workforce on just keeping their pay at the level of inflation. So bear in mind, they're not asking to be richer, they're just asking to keep their heads above water. And you have somebody saying, even in asking for that, you're playing into the hands of a foreign authoritarian waging a European war. I mean, it just goes, I think it really cuts to the heart of the way in which Tory cabinet ministers at the moment seem completely disconnected from what ordinary people think and how ordinary people live.
Kate, do you think Nadhim Zahawi misspoke?
I think he overstepped the mark. I don't think nurses should be going on strike this December. I think the ask of almost a 20% pay increase is too much. And I think that they are genuinely putting lives on the line by taking this action. That being said, I think the cabinet secretary has mishandled this completely in the way that he's worded this. It is not playing into the hands of a foreign dictator, as Zoe says, to ask for more pay or to request more pay, especially when inflation is making us all feel significantly poorer. I don't think that individuals' honest reading of their situation, which is that, for a lot of people, they're wondering if they can even pay the bills this winter. I don't think to suggest that questioning that and asking your employer for a pay raise is playing into the hands of Vladimir Putin. And I just think he's made a mistake because ultimately, when nurses, if they do go on strike this December, and it looks like they're set to, a lot is going to come down as to whether or not the government looks like it's trying to work with the nurses or whether or not they're trying to work against them. And I think any government that seemed to be trying to talk to them, trying to win them on side, trying to come to a more reasonable pay agreement will be seen quite well in the eyes of the public, especially when they have been deprived those NHS services. And many people are going to be very frustrated that people aren't showing up to work to play catch up. But if it does, these fighting words from Zahawi, I think are going to get the government into more trouble than it really needs to get into. They're going to look less reasonable than they otherwise would if they kept the language friendly and continued to point out that an almost 20% pay increase is simply not feasible at this time.
Welcome back to the press preview. Still with me, Zoe Williams and Kate Andrews, taking us through the papers. There they both are. Let us have a look at the FT. And the picture there is of Cyril Ramaphosa smiling broadly, but he doesn't really have very much to smile about, does he, Kate?
No, the South African president, as the FT says, is fighting for his political life after scandal has been revealed over the theft on his game farm, and he has said that he is leaving this up to the African National Congress as to which way they're going to determine his political fate. But it is certainly an uncomfortable time for him, and the row is coming just weeks before the party was to hold a leadership vote. So, very poor timing for him, and big questions over the future of leadership in South Africa.
Yes, and what do we make of that, Zoe? Because he is coming from that traditional ANC background, will have worked with Nelson Mandela, but a very different era now we're seeing in South African politics.
I mean, there is a kind of constant, and it is, let's not forget, a relatively new democratic culture in South Africa. Really, it might feel like a long time, but it's actually not that long in democracy terms since apartheid ended. And it is very, very painful for the political landscape to see it beset by corruption allegations. Whatever stage they get to, and whatever stage they get to in the legal proceedings, it's just extremely painful to see all the hope of the new democracy kind of sullied like this. So yeah, I do think it's a really sad time in the nation's political recent history.
Yes, and Kate, we read that he came to power on a reputation as a reformer, and on a pledge to restore what's described as clean government.
I think Zoe makes an important point about the difficulties there. Even in very developed democracies, when there's scandal, it can certainly cause a rupture. It can cause, just look at the United States as it was trying to hand over power after the 2020 election. Very established democracies can have their own struggles when it comes to this kind of corruption. But if you're talking about a relatively new democracy that is even younger and even more vulnerable to these kinds of things, especially when promises have been made about integrity and creating a much cleaner system, it can really shake things up. So a very difficult revelation, and one that the African National Congress, we can only hope will make the right call on to reestablish trust in that system.
Let's move on to the Daily Mail and another photograph of wide grins. And these we were hoping that we would see. They have gone through. Talk us through this, Zoe. Did you watch the game?
I really want to sound like a football expert, and I'm really mindful that I won't. All I can speak to is the bit of the country that doesn't really follow it, but is happy that everybody else is happy. All I can say is everybody does seem to be really, really happy. It's like a lot of people weren't expecting to lose to Senegal, but there was just enough suspense that it was really exciting. And then the win was very resounding. Apparently, look at them. It's just enough to put anybody. So obviously it's not, it would be better if we were playing France later in the tournament, because they're probably the best other team left in the tournament. Twitter football thinks that France has got the edge. Betting football thinks that England has the edge. So all we can do is wait and see.
That was expert analysis, I think.
That's really good.
And Zoe, what did you watch first of all, Zoe? Oh, yeah, Kate, sorry, I meant Kate, actually. I'm looking at you and saying, Zoe. Kate.
I did, and I can speak for the part of the country that is by no means a football expert and cannot do proper analysis on this, but is watching and is extremely excited and following along. And it strikes me that we're now just getting into heartbreak zone, where we're excited enough that if things start to go badly wrong, and they go wrong very quickly, we will be a heartbroken nation once again. But very exciting that England's playing France next weekend, and with if they can carry on their performance today into next weekend, we can feel pretty good. But there are no guarantees, and these knockout rounds in football, they're extremely exciting and extremely tense. I was watching the match, but I don't actually need to, because I can also hear when we've done well or done badly from my local club down the road. The screams and shouts are so loud, I know when we've scored.
Absolutely. You started off so positive, and then you had to go and mention heartbreak. Don't say those words.
We have to prepare.
Oh, no. Let's just be positive. Speak life and success into it, and it shall come to be. Thank you both for taking us through the papers.